Everyone, my name is Chelsea Landbatter. I thought it was really interesting looking this week at the racial identity development theory. I loved looking through the phases and kind of identifying with some of the phases more strongly than others, and kind of deciding throughout my life where I transitioned from one phase to the other. I've mostly lived in a suburb of a large city, which is predominantly white. I've had experiences that have shaped my racial identity, which I'll touch on, but I feel like one of the biggest key components for me was, living in such a predominantly white culture, was turning to literature for literature and understanding and like further reading and comprehension on my own racial identity and understanding, yeah, just that of others. So I think that's been one of the biggest key components for me. Um, and I love that literature and art and expression of art can kind of bring this like common human experience, and we can, relate through those mediums a lot with others. So I think I first became aware of my race and racial self through some of my earliest experiences just with, other collective races. Basically, what I'd identify as the contact phase. So, one of the first experiences I had, which I consider the contact phase, I was in adolescence, probably 13 or 14. So, um, in the Erikson theory, it was the identity versus isolation stage. We were doing kind of like a community service project for Christmas. We, as a youth, raised money and then went and bought toys, and we were going to deliver them to some of the families in our city who couldn't afford to buy their children Christmas gifts. And as we delivered the toys to the families, I remember just really noticing we were in like a really poor part of town, and all of the families were people of color, mostly Mexican American. I remember this was kind of the first time that I made this distinction of, a collective group of people of color living in poverty. And I was a kid, so I think it was just sort of an awareness, I guess. Yeah, like the contact phase, just sort of being aware of the differences. Um, and and then another experience I had, I was in college. I moved to New York City for a semester of school, and I remember this woman sat next to me on the subway, and she had sandals on, and I looked down and I noticed her feet looked exactly like my feet. We had identical feet. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's what my feet would look like if I was black. And it sounds so silly, but I sort of had this like wave of connectedness, or like, I don't know, togetherness with humanity. It was kind of like a really beautiful experience that I'll never forget. I kind of felt like, oh, I'm kind of one in this struggle, and this person is like me, and we can relate. And I remember coming home from that trip just being really immersed in a lot of cultures and, race and ethnicity, and really soaking it up and loving it. I remember coming home and going to dinner with my parents to just like a local neighborhood restaurant, and I remember sitting down and looking around and thinking, man, everyone looks the same. They're all white, middle class, button up collared shirts. And I remember this was kind of like the first experience I had, just feeling, or this is like how I would identify feeling the disintegration stage, like a little embarrassed and kind of shameful, and just like, oh, I don't, I don't want to live in this, and so that was an interesting experience for me. Um, and then lastly, I just want to just touch on my strong relation to literature, and how it's absolutely helped me understand my whiteness and the complexity of the CRT theories. My degree was English literature, so I had the opportunity to take courses like American Lit, early American Lit, where we learned about Native people, their stories, cultures, persecution, South African literature, the apartheid racism in that country, African American studies. I took a childhood diversity and literature course. And then I've just continued education and reading, been very, very interested in all of this. I think that's how I ended up in this MSW, but reading authors like Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, Joy Harjo, Malcolm X, Michael Eric Dyson, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Alan Payton, Derek Bell, Coleman Hughes. I've just continued like soaking up this knowledge through literature. Um, so I feel that I've come to a place of autonomy in my adulthood, just with the racial identity stage. I feel very aware of my whiteness. I don't feel anger. I feel very concerned about how to make changes in our society. And to answer the question, like whether or not I participate in institutionalized racism, yes, every day. My zip code redlining, the schools I went to, the schools my children go to, the sports, the neighborhood tax opportunities that provide sports and opportunities that way for kids, generational wealth, the wealth my parents have given me, the access to food and health care that I receive. They're all part of an institutionalized racism that I feel that I'm actually living every day. And so I think my hope is that becoming a social worker, I can give back to communities. I can help people who are experiencing institutionalized racism and personal racism. I think a lot of it is a much larger macro problem that we're dealing with that comes with systems and laws that are so age old in this country. And the question is, how do we tackle those? We can tackle racism on a personal level. We can start to think about it and confront it. But really, what the problem feels in this country is just so systemic, and so ingrained in our laws, that sometimes it's hard and sad to think about how we can actually change this for our future. The two quotes that I want to give are not from the reading this week, but I really love them a lot. The first one is from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I think this is true with social work. This is what we're doing, right? We're facing it. And whether or not, we feel like we can just change it in a moment. Yeah, a lot of the times we can't, but the fact that we're facing it is the most important thing. And then the last one is Desmond Tutu. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And I love this quote too, because I think sometimes we bury our head in the sand and we think, oh, well, we're just living in our lives. And I think that can be really easy to do. And I don't want to do that. I want to make a change on the macro and the micro level. And I hope that I can really do that with learning more and more about my racial identity and other racial identities.